2 weeks ago, Jeff Bell and I laid down the groundwork for the running back rooms around the NFL. And last week, we talked about all of the different wide receiver rooms around the NFL. And now that we've got those baselines, we're going to talk about some of the most interesting rooms around the league, ones with numbers and usage trends that are changing and worth noticing. Jeff, you do this every single week. You kind of look at all of the running back touches and opportunities. You look at all of the targets and how those are split up among wide receivers. Any major takeaways from week 3?
I think the biggest takeaway when I'm looking at running back rooms, there were a handful of running back rooms that I think early in the season, coaches were probably trying to figure out how things will shake out, who they've got, who can do what. And then I think week 3, which is usually kind of what happens in week 3, there was some consolidation, there was some decisions probably made in personnel and said, we gave these guys a shot, but these two are going to be our guys. And so I think that my biggest takeaway was seeing some of these running back rooms narrow out, where before we had 3 running backs playing, now we might just have 2.
Yeah, and I kind of had a similar intro in the article that I wrote this morning where I said once is a blip and twice can be coincidental, but 3 times is kind of a trend where this is when I think we can start to get a clearer picture of a lot of these teams. We don't want to overreact too much to week 1. Week 2, we start to take notice, but now we're ready to kind of definitively start looking at some of these backfields and what we might make of them. So I think what you talk about, 3 narrowing down to 2 is a perfect segue for the first one that we want to talk about here, the New York Jets. What we saw early in the season was very much so a 3-headed committee, just like we were told by Aaron Glenn that it was going to be. But last week, we saw a change in usage. Isaiah Davis didn't run a single route, didn't get a single attempt. It was just Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, but Braylon Allen was a lot more involved than he was in the earlier weeks. So is this kind of what you're expecting going forward, Jeff, this type of 65-35 split? Or do you think that was just kind of what we saw last week, and now we have to go back to the drawing board for week 4?
This is what I expect to see narrowing. Isaiah Davis, I think, is a fine player, but it never really made much sense to me when you look at there's just a lot of overlap maybe in his skill set with what Breece Hall can give you. And I think
Right.
Breece Hall gives it to you a lot better than Isaiah Davis does. So if you're going to, Braylon Allen is much different than the two of them. So if you're going to look at how you're going to build this backfield out, it's the type of thing of to have all 3 involved. I think it can be harder for the running backs to get a rhythm. I think Allen's the type of player that, gets in there, gets hit a little bit, keeps moving a little bit, and then gets his rhythm and wears down the defense and is able to rip out some chunk yardage. Breece Hall is one of the most talented running backs in the NFL. We know that. So inserting Davis in here never made a ton of sense. And I think that as Tanner Ekstrand tries to get his stamp on this, tries to get this offense rolling, leading back a little bit more on that Detroit model and seeing what we saw on Monday night with Jahmyr Gibbs and with David Montgomery having such a dominant performance.
And that was going to be my next question. I was going to set you up and ask you, where did Aaron Glenn come from? Where did Tanner Engstrom come from? And obviously, yeah, I think that when you look at, it's not a one-to-one comparison, but Breece Hall can do a lot of the things Jahmyr Gibbs can do, and Braylon Allen can do a lot of the things that David Montgomery can do, and it's just such a good complementary skill set between those two guys. So I'm with you as well. Isaiah Davis, a big faller in my rest of season rankings. I haven't moved Braylon Allen up too much, but I think that this is worth noting that he was a little bit more involved last week, and if I see that trend continue into week 4, I will definitely make that change. Houston Texans, another one that we saw early in the year, was a 3-headed committee. We saw Nick Chubb, we saw a little bit of Woody Marks, we saw some Dare Ogunbowale, but in week 3, Ogunbowale was essentially out of the picture. And not only that, but we saw the usage tighten up a little bit. Rough numbers here, but week 1, it was kind of like an 85-15 split between Nick Chubb and Woody Marks. That was 80-20 in week 2. And last year, we saw darn close to a committee, 60-40 split between Nick Chubb and Woody Marks. So this is one that I'm definitely paying attention to because Nick Chubb, frankly, just looks like an older running back who has suffered some really bad knee injuries. He does not look like himself, and you can just see that Woody Marks has juice right now that Chubb doesn't.
Yeah, I think Monday night, flashing back to a couple weeks ago when they played Tampa Bay, we saw Woody Marks kind of get a little bit of his first real opportunity, and he flashed. He made a couple plays, and then we saw coming off of that week 3, you talk about 60-40. In terms of snaps, it was 50-50. I think it was 52 for Chubb. Actually, I think it was 52 for Marks and 48 for Chubb. So it was almost dead even down the middle. I think when you look at it, Dare Ogunbowale, the coaching staff knows him. It's the type of thing, there was a level of trust there. They knew they needed a complimentary receiving back. next to Nick Chubb there. So start him out, then kind of see what Woody Marks can give them. But this is an 0-3 team. They're searching for some answers, and leading on the rookie, letting him get up and running, I think might be one of those potential answers, because we know what you're going to get with Ogunbowale.
Right. And I want to talk about Nick Chubb quickly too, because I think a lot of people see the production. You know, he had decent production in week 2 and think that he is going to be this sort of workhorse. Did you see the comments coming out of that week 2 game where they asked Todd Bowles about the touchdown, and they said it kind of looked like you guys let Nick Chubb score on that touchdown, and his response, he said, "No comment. We got the win, and that's all that matters." So you take that away, and I know, like, taking away a play is a dangerous game, and it's not what I want to do here. But like, my goodness, you take that play away, and Nick Chubb is out here averaging about 3 yards per carry without a touchdown on the year. So Marks just looks like a better player, and we saw at USC, you know, he's very good at catching passes as well, which can help alleviate some of the pressure that CJ Stroud has been feeling behind this offensive line. So Woody Marks still available on quite a few waiver wires out there in your redraft leagues. Obviously, not in any dynasty leagues, but a guy who I think we're going to see his role grow quite a bit in these next few weeks. Next one we want to talk about, Jeff, the Buffalo Bills. This is kind of a weird one, and I want to get your take on this because we saw Ray Davis just kind of erased from the game plan last week. Let me know what's going on here. I mean, he ran 2 routes, but didn't get a single attempt, didn't get a single target. What's going on here with Ray Davis right now?
Well, he wasn't very involved in week 1 either. And if you, I mean, obviously everybody
Mhm.
remembers that was that back and forth game with Baltimore. Week 2 was the absolute blowout against the Jets. He saw some usage there. He's just the handcuff to James Cook right now. And so James Cook is stepping forward into a lead back feature role. He got that contract, and the team is giving it to him a little bit more. And he's really been the Josh Allen is Josh Allen, and he's playing at a level of just composure and understanding of defenses and manipulation of defenses. But it's really been James Cook has been the engine of that offense through these first 3 games, and then bringing Ty Johnson in as the change of pace there, passing down type of a back, but at the same time not ultra involved in the passing game. Ray Davis is just kind of the odd man out there because they're treating James Cook as the early down workhorse. So there's not really room for Ray Davis to fit in there. And that's where I think that Davis, now that being said, I think if James Cook were to miss a game, I think that Ray Davis is still the piece that you would want, that he would be the guy that would have a shot at getting 20 touches. But right now, there's not going to be any of this 3-headed committee outside of some lopsided games that allows Davis some opportunity to kill some clock.
And you know, that's very similar to what we saw last year. Like, Ray Davis didn't do much, but in the one game that James Cook didn't play, he stepped in. He had over 20 opportunities, had over 150 yards, and that's why we get so excited. And this kind of reminds me of the Cincinnati backfield in a way, where Ty Johnson is almost the Samaje Perine. I think people see him getting the looks and operating as the RB2 and thinks that he has some sort of contingent value. But whether it's James Cook or Chase Brown out there, it doesn't really change the role for Samaje Perine or Ty Johnson. And then if they go down to Taj Brooks or Ray Davis on the depth chart, I think Ty Johnson's role is pretty sticky, and he's going to maintain doing what he does. And we're looking at some of these other guys with no standalone value whatsoever. But I do think that Ray Davis is still that injury away guy, that if something were to happen to James Cook, he'd step in there and have some good upside. Denver Broncos. Dare I say we might be getting a little bit of clarity here? We saw some weird stuff going on in the first couple of weeks with Tyler Beatty being the or Tyler Bede, I'm sorry, being the lead target earner. We saw Adam Prentice coming in week 2, but week 3 it seemed like it was a bit more consolidated. We saw J.K. Dobbins and we saw R.J. Harvey, and I think that's what we had all hoped for in the preseason, right, Jeff?
Yeah, that's obviously what everybody hoped for. And especially if you're looking at EDP, people were hoping that it's going to be RJ Harvey sitting in the role at J.K. Dobbins. J.K. Dobbins is nearly a bell cow back right now, the way that they're utilizing him. And some of it's the games that they've been involved with. But I think some of it's J.K. Dobbins is a better football player than RJ Harvey is right now at this moment in time. And I think that is kind of one of the takeaways from this week of seeing some of these veterans. They're just better than the rookies at this point in time. That doesn't mean that it will be the same case in a month, but it means that right now they're processing quicker because they have fresh legs. They have experience. They know what they need to do. but it does give clarity. And I'm going to have to write this instead of like Batty. I'm going to have to write it Bidet in order to like actually
Bidet.
say yes, in order to actually say his name correctly, like at any point in time. Bidet, but he had that passing down role and they erased him and they put Harvey. Harvey picked up some of it, and then Dobbins picked up even more of it. And so you kind of go from this mess of a committee that J.K. Dobbins was leading to, and just like the other teams that we've talked about, cleaner running two running backs, and you're getting some encouragement from Harvey, but you're frustrated if you paid that ADP that he was sitting at.
Yeah, and I think, we're seeing a nice trend for RJ Harvey. He had 1 target in week 1, 2 targets in week 2, 3 targets in week 3. So he's getting steadily more involved as a pass catcher. And the routes run, he had 10 routes run to RJ Harvey's 18. So the rushing opportunities are still going to J.K. Dobbins. He had him there 11-2, and I don't expect that to change anytime soon. But we also, J.K. Dobbins has looked spectacular through the first 3 weeks. Like, I don't want to take anything away from him, but we did see that last year as well. Remember, like, he looked really good to start the year and then kind of slowed down as
He
the
got
season
hurt.
progressed. So
And
he
that's
did
the
get hurt.
the entire story of J.K. Dobbins is if he could stay healthy, he would be a top 15 caliber back. And so there's just no faith. That's the reason why he sat out in free agency for so long. There's no faith in that his ability to stay healthy. But as long as he is healthy, I think he's going to be a better football player than RJ Harvey.
Yeah, and I think the takeaway here too is that, like, if J.K. Dobbins does have to miss any time or something like that, like we talk about Ray Davis just stepping in to the role for James Cook, I don't think that'll happen in Denver. So I think, like, people, there's a reason to be excited for RJ Harvey because he catch passes, he can make big plays, but if J.K. Dobbins goes down, Sean Payton's gonna reach into his bag and pull out an Adam Prentice or a Tyler Bidet or somebody off the street. Like, this is just how he operates. So I think anybody who is hoping that RJ Harvey could just run away with, a 90% opportunity share in this backfield, that is not going to happen, but there could still be some value as a high-end RB2 if he's, consistently on the field and does start to show some of that flash that we like so much
I
at
need to
UCF.
I need to give a nod to, or maybe not, maybe a poke might be more to our buddy Dan Hendry, because I had modeled like this backfield this way with Dobbins kind of more as like a 60-40 type,
Yeah.
and Dan pushed back on me a little bit, and I've got so much respect for Dan that like I went back to the drawing board, even it out a little bit, and I'm like, man, like stick to my priors, like
Yeah. I mean, these veterans, and I will say there's still a lot of season left.
there
We're
is.
3 games into an 18-game season, and a lot can change. J.K. Dobbins could get hurt. He can start to regress a little bit. RJ Harvey could just be so good that they can't ignore him. Like, there's still a lot of ways that this can break. But right now, J.K. Dobbins looks like the better back, and he's getting more work. And I think that we're looking at him right now in that consistent, plug and play RB2 conversation. We'll see if he can maintain that for the rest of the season. But, just something that kind of tenet to how I play fantasy football is you look at running backs in these short-term windows. Like, I'm not trying to look at any of these guys as season-long anchors. It's, what are you doing for me right now? Can I rely on you to be an RB2 in my lineup? And there were a lot of guys early in the season where we were putting Travion Henderson and RJ Harvey in our week 1 lineup saying, like, yes, these guys are going to be so good. And now they're obviously on our bench, but that's what happens as we get more information. So sure, we can talk about all of the way that this could go wrong down the road for J.K. Dobbins, but at the end of the day, he's getting the work now. He's doing well with those opportunities, and he's an RB2. 2 more backfields we want to talk about here, Jeff. The New Orleans Saints. This is another one that we see changing a little bit. There was a little bit of Devin Neal earlier in the season. Last week, we didn't see any Devin Neal at all. The attempts were split between Alvin Kamara and Kendre Miller, 18-7. Kendre Miller slowly getting himself more involved every single week. But of course, Alvin Kamara still has the stranglehold on routes here, 30-8. How do you see this shaking out? Do you think that Alvin Kamara is just going to continue going out here every week for the New Orleans Saints? Do you think that Kendre Miller carves out a bigger role? Or, as we've alluded to, it seems like we've been talking about since March, like a potential trade for Alvin Kamara on the horizon.
Well, I think that's the big question, whether or not Alvin Kamara gets traded off this team, because I think that you mentioned that it narrowed up a little bit. How much of that was just getting absolutely nuked and blown out in the game where they kind of
Yeah,
said, we'll pull off
good point.
Alvin Kamara here.
Good point.
My concern on Kamara of what I think is we're seeing happening, and I know in week 2 he did have 6 targets, which feels a little bit more like Alvin Kamara, but we're seeing Kellen Moore kind of treat him as Saquon Barkley last year in Kellen Moore's offense and kind of be
Mhm.
a little bit more just a pure running back and a lot less Alvin Kamara. And I think that that's a frustrating point for fantasy managers because we know where Alvin Kamara, what his best traits are and where he gets the most fantasy, where any back gets the most fantasy points is that involvement in the passing game. But the Saints have been a little bit more vertical in their passing game and then trying to clear out space, letting Kamara kind of be that Barkley in a what is a very horrible offense right now. And so I think that when you talk about Miller, the first question would be how competitive are the Saints going to be? I mean, they're playing the Bills this week, so bless you. You fly across the country to play the Seahawks, get absolutely blown out, and now you got to play Buffalo the next week. So that is a difficult turnaround. But at what point do they call a spade and let Kamara potentially go somewhere else? I mean, just get him to the Chiefs at this point because if the Chiefs are needs help somewhere, and if they're not going to use they're not going to use Brashard Smith, if they're not going to use Isaiah Pacheco more than Kareem Hunt, just give them Alvin Kamara at this point.
Yeah, I mean, this is the Dynasty show. Everyone listening to the show knows, like, if you're 0-3, there's no room for a 30-year-old running back on that roster. Like, give him to a team that needs him and cash in for some picks or some young talent. Like, do something here, New Orleans. But I think a big part of what we're seeing from Alvin Kamara, which, no other way to really spin it, it's been a disappointing year so far for Alvin Kamara. But I think it has to do with the uh, maturity, maybe, or just like the development of the quarterback room there. Derek Carr, for all of his flaws, was a good enough quarterback to get through his progressions and hit Alvin Kamara when nobody else was open. Spencer Rattler doesn't really have that yet. Like he's just going to chuck it deep to Chris Olave in triple coverage and hope that Olave can come down with it. So that's why we're not seeing this target volume that has made Alvin Kamara so good over the years. And like you said, in Kellen Moore's offense, they aren't scheming up touches for the running back. There's the check down option, and Spencer Rattler just isn't really getting there. Last one we want to talk about here, Jeff, and then we're going to talk about some wide receivers. So stick around, anybody listening. But the Jacksonville Jaguars, I think this is one of the buzziest running back rooms in the NFL right now. Tootin is taking over, is what they'll lead you to believe on social media. But the reality is that Travis Etienne's still the top dog here at 16 carries to Tootin's 6. The routes is where things get really interesting. LaQuint Allen actually led the running back room in routes last week. Travis Etienne was just behind him, 15 to 17. And then Tootin, kind of a non-factor in the passing game, but he did have that reception for a touchdown 2 weeks ago. So people don't really realize that did come a little bit fluky. What's your takeaway on this Jacksonville backfield?
Yeah, I think this is a very interesting backfield because if you're just looking at like watching red zone, looking at the highlights, maybe looking at fantasy totals, you could Tootin got into the end zone each of the last 2 weeks. You can't deny
Yep.
that. He got into the end zone. He had a great highlight run on that catch that you talked about in week 2. But the way that this backfield's developing, it's almost like the Bills a little bit, where LaQuinn Allen is playing the passing downs, but he's not allowed to touch the ball. But he's playing the passing downs like Ty Johnson, basically. But
Mhm.
then ETN has kind of the James Cook role, where ETN is on pace for. Everybody's talking about ETN's going to give the job out. ETN's on pace for his best year of his career. I mean, some of that's a massive week 143 yards, but he's on pace for the best year of his career by a good margin at this
Mhm.
point through just 3 games. And then Tootin is like the Ray Davis of like he'll pitch in occasionally. He's got the explosion, which I mean Ray Davis doesn't have that explosion, but he's been able to find the end zone. But if you watched the game against Houston or the game against Cincinnati, it was definitely a fluke of like a touchdown. And I think that it's for us, a running back touchdown doesn't feel ultra fluky outside of like a dedicated goal line vulture situation. But if you were to look at it as a wide receiver, and this is just like a deep vertical burner wide receiver that got behind the defense once or twice, like we're intelligent enough now. We dismiss that kind of almost out of hand, maybe too much, Trey Tucker. But at the same time, we look at that as saying, well, that was a fluke play. Can that happen again? We don't do the same thing with running backs. And some of it also, I think, is the excitement and around the intrigue around Tootin.
And I think that's it. A guy that just really lit up the combine, athleticism off the charts, high expectations for the Jacksonville offense. They make these big splashy offseason moves, and I think that people saw what happened last year with Bucky Irving and just assume that Tootin is going to be this year's Bucky Irving. But I think the hurdle to clear of Travis Etienne is much higher than the hurdle to clear of Rashad White. And as you talked about, he's playing some of the best football of his career right now, pacing for a career year on a contract year as well, where he wants to play well. So I think this idea that, oh, it's only a matter of time before Bashaw Tootin takes Travis Etienne's lunch, I'm just not really buying into that. Etienne has looked good in this offense. I think he'll retain the role. That doesn't mean that Tootin doesn't have value because he's going to get touches as well. And he seems trusted near the goal line and he can rip off big plays. But I think this is one where I'm still looking at Etienne as kind of a low end RB1, high end RB2. And Tootin is kind of floating still in that RB3 category for me. And it's tough to move much higher than that based on the usage.
Yeah, I think it's, it plays into the Saints point a little bit, but also into the Jaguars. Both of them new offensive coordinators, well, new coaches that are offensive minded head coaches. They're both trying to develop their quarterbacks. And in that type of situation, you're going to lean on the veteran because the veteran has just seen more. They're able to help call out blitzes, those types of things. And so as you're trying to integrate your offense, get it successful and get it up and running, that's a really hard thing to do when like the Saints with like Henry Miller hasn't got a ton of reps in his career. And you've got Spencer Rattler out there trying to learn Kellen Moore's new offense, or even the rapport that goes back for, God, I think it's a decade at this point now between Trevor Lawrence and Travis Etienne after playing together their entire Clemson career, now being together at Jacksonville their entire careers. So you've got that situation of just a comfort level built in between the two of them, trying to learn Liam Cohen's offense, the Jaguars are 2-1 and they really should be 3-0. But it doesn't feel like that because
the vibes are really bad for a team
the
that's winning
vibes are
games.
weird, and you're not getting it from Brian Thomas, and you're not getting it from Travis Hunter, and Bashal Tootin hasn't taken over yet. So like everything's gross and yucky in fantasy, but meanwhile in real football, they're 2-1.
Well, let's stick down in Jacksonville and talk about this a little bit more. Talk a little bit about Liam Cohen and Trevor Lawrence and what's going on with Brian Thomas Jr. Let's kind of turn the page. And this is what we're going to do every week on this Wednesday show. We're going to start off the show talking about running backs. Then we'll talk about some wide receiver situations. And we were, we wanted to talk about the backfield in Jacksonville, but we also need to talk about the wide receivers here. This is one where Brian Thomas Jr. is the clear lead target earner there, but it just hasn't been pretty so far. Meanwhile, we see Travis Hunter second in targets with 16. Brenton Strange is right there with 16 as well. But then last week, we saw Parker Washington step into a really big role. 2 weeks ago, we saw Diami Brown score 2 touchdowns. So this is one right now where I wonder if the bad vibes around Jacksonville have to do with the fantasy impact, where Trevor Lawrence hasn't scored a lot of points and Brian Thomas Jr. is very disappointing and Travis Hunter is very disappointing. They're just getting other players involved than the guys that we expected. But what are we supposed to expect now going forward? Is it going to eventually be Brian Thomas Jr. and Travis Hunter like we had hoped for? Or are we going to keep seeing these tertiary pieces getting involved on a weekly basis?
Well, right now, Parker Washington is better at the thing that they're asking Parker Washington to do, which was the same thing that they started out asking Travis Hunter to do. Then Travis Hunter is at that thing. Parker Washington's a very good NFL receiver. And this was my trepidation when you really looked at the Travis Hunter situation in the preseason of he's more of a natural cornerback. And so you want to get him acclimated, get him successful, get him up and running. And cornerback probably is more of that natural lean there. But when you look at the rooms between what Jacksonville's wide receiver room has, when you look at Brian Thomas, when you look at Parker Washington, when you look at Diami Brown, those are all three starting-ish caliber NFL wide receivers. Whereas on the cornerback side, they've been decimated with injuries. And so Hunter's versatility, if one room needs him more than the other room, you're going to naturally lean him that direction because that's the weak point in your team right now. But also because of Brian Thomas Jr.'s struggles, you need Parker Washington out there to be kind of the reliable chain mover underneath guy that really serves in a lot of what Evan Ingram was bringing to Trevor Lawrence a couple years ago when there was great success and they made it into the playoffs. Brenton Strange stepped up a little bit this past week, but he hadn't done it the first couple of weeks. So you need studying presences on this offense, and Travis Hunter trying to learn how to play wide receiver at an NFL level is definitely not a studying presence when Brian Thomas Jr. is about the most volatile presence right now in football.
And what do you make of what's happening with Brian Thomas Jr.? I mean, a lot of it has been hands issues, which wasn't really something that we even thought about in his rookie season. He was catching everything, but now they're asking him to run different routes where he's not just going one on one with the guy on the boundary. They're asking him to catch the ball through traffic across the middle of the field. And it just doesn't seem like he's that type of player. I don't know if there's some apprehension to getting hit or what it is, but we're just seeing like very uncharacteristic drops from Brian Thomas Jr. Do you think they try to get him back in a role that's more suited for him, or do you think this should just end up being one of those like big draft day busts?
I don't. I mean, the talent is clearly there, so I hesitate to say go all the way to draft day bust. He's seeing the volume, the talent is there. I think it's talked. I think it was last week we talked about like shooters in basketball. Sometimes you just need to see the ball go in the basket, and I think
Yep.
that Brian Thomas Jr. probably needs to see the ball go in the basket a little bit right now. Some
They
of it,
tried. They drew up a rushing touchdown for him in week
yeah,
one.
yeah. Well, and he's an amazing basketball player. He like could have played in the SEC basketball like that. So that's. But I think that when you look at the history of Brian Thomas Jr., there was a lot with God, why am I blanking on LSU's coach Brian Kelly? So Brian Thomas Jr. really frustrated the heck out of Brian Kelly for a number of years, and then Brian Kelly kind of went in the press and said something to the effect of like, if he got his head together, he's the best wide receiver, but he hasn't done it yet. And then he had a really good year at the end of his LSU career with Jane Daniels, with Malik Neighbors. And when you look at that situation, and when you look at what happened last year in Jacksonville when he took off, the expectations were gone. There were no
Mhm.
expectations. Like it was the type of thing of like everything that he brought to LSU with Malik Neighbors, with Davis, or with Daniels was complimentary. So it wasn't like they were counting on Brian Thomas Jr. week in, week out. And then last year it was just garbage time with Mac Jones, YOLO ball, like let's go. And this year, I think it's the type of thing of recognizing and wanting to step up into a larger role, and then just kind of things mount. And I think one of
Mhm.
the things that I think Xavier Legette is really struggling with it in his career
Yeah.
of just kind of like the frustrations, and you miss a play here, you miss a play there. And I think that one of the I've blanking on, I don't know who it is, but somebody had a really good call out on Quentin Johnston on the way that for what he has dealt with in his career in terms of the negativity in the media and social media, like all the drops and all that stuff. There was a large national account that had mentioned on just the way that he was able to work through that is like, because of what was going on there, can crush guys. And Quentin
Yeah.
Johnston completely worked through it and became what we're seeing now through these first three games.
So I gotta say, man, beating Pat Surtain like a drum last week. Like to see that. I went back this morning. I was just a little curious, and I'm like, how much of this was just Quentin Johnson getting schemed up touches? I'm like, no, like you saw there were multiple times where they'd put QJ in motion. Pat Surtain was following him in, and on zone coverage, they were pointing him out. Like he'd get press coverage, and Quentin Johnson was just beating him. Like he is taking that year three step, and love to see that. Don't want to get off on too much of a tangent there, but good call on
Well,
QJ this year,
Quentin
Jeff.
Johnston's not a tangent. We can talk about Quentin Johnston all day long, but
Let's talk about the Green Bay Packers, though. We saw a change last week with no Jaden Reed in the game plan as he is recovering from collarbone and Jones fracture surgery. Might come back at the end of the year, but we're just going to act like he isn't for the sake of this discussion. Tucker Kraft is the leading target earner through 3 weeks, Jeff, with just 14 targets. They are spreading this ball thin in Green Bay. And what we saw last week, I think a lot of people were excited about Matthew Golden. They were excited about Dontavian Wicks. And then, Tucker Kraft picks up an injury. So there's some excitement about Luke Musgrave. And what happens? Josh Jacobs comes out and has twice as many targets as anybody else on the team. Is this just a game plan thing? Like just trying to get the ball out of Jordan Love's hands as he's going against this meat grinder of a defense? What happened last week? Because there were so many high expectations for the Packers. And we just saw a completely different game plan. I talked about just last week how much I liked Jordan Love, the intended air yards per pass attempt, leading the league through 2 weeks, pushing the ball downfield at an average 12.5 yard clip. Last week, 1.6 yards downfield was the lowest among all quarterbacks. So it's like everything that we thought we knew about the Packers through 2 weeks just came crashing down in week three.
do you think that the Packers were at their optimum level of prepared to play the game last week?
I don't think so, and I don't know how you can prepare for Myles Garrett coming down your throat every single time that he gets an opportunity. I mean, they were just getting shredded. That offensive line wasn't there. They had injuries on the offensive line as well, and I just don't think that they had any answer for Cleveland's pass rush.
Yeah, I think my takeaway of just that game in general, I think that they blew the Lions out in week 1, and then they had the Thursday Island game where they just dominated the Commanders, and because of that, they got smoke blowing up them all weekend long on every single show possible and talking about the Commander performance, along with speculating what would happen in week 2. They got some extra time off. They were dealing with some receiver injuries. I think they walked into that Cleveland game thinking this is a pushover game. The Browns are not a good team. Let's just get in here. We'll run the ball. We'll take care of the win. And then even it was I rewatched the game the other day, and it was 10-0 late in the third quarter, and the announcers were just kind of they were shifted into like when it's like a 4 touchdown game and they start talking about like
Mhm.
golf and like other things, like it's like it shifted into like that mode, and then the Browns just didn't go away. And I think that it's when I looked at that game with the Packers, I think they really looked at it as we're going to be able to run the ball down the Browns' throats. They're not going to be able to move it on our defense. We're dealing with these receiver injuries. Let's just get in here, get out with a win. We'll get a little bit healthier. We'll reset. And we've got this big game that is circled on a calendar for Micah Parsons with Dallas coming up this week. And I think it was just a trap game. It was just a classic trap game for the Packers. And then they got into the game and they said, oh, dang, we didn't scheme up for this defense. And we'll just panic, throw it to Josh Jacobs because I don't know what else we can do right now. And I think that it was a learning experience probably for that entire team.
I think so. And did you see the comments earlier in the week? And I'm drawing a blank right now. I was looking at and I can't find the comment, but there was some Packers player saying like, "We can beat anybody. Like, I think this team's going to go
Yeah.
undefeated." And like they were really feeling themselves off
Yep.
those first 2 weeks. And Matt LaFleur was mad in the post game press conference, and he talked about that comment specifically. And he said, "I tell these guys all the time, we are trying to go 1-0 every single week. That's the only goal. When we start looking ahead this early in the season, this is when bad things happen." So I think that you are spot on here. I think they just went in thinking that this was just going to be an easy lay down, get it over with, and walk out of Cleveland 3-0. And yeah, I mean, they panicked here. So looking at this, I mean, what do we make of this? Because I look at the routes run. Dobbs was the clear leader there, but we saw a pretty big increase for Matthew Golden, who ran 26 routes in this game, which was more than higher route participation than we've seen through the first few weeks. So there's a lot of talk about Matthew Golden stepping into that Jaden Reed game. I think we can just kind of like take this week 3 matchup and just throw it out and not analyze it too much because I think it was a weird game for Green Bay. Did you think that Matthew Golden can step up and be that number 2 receiver now for the Packers?
Yeah, I mean, maybe the number 1 receiver, because that was all the talk of
Yeah.
camp, that he had established himself as the number 1 receiver, and then he was hardly involved through the first couple of games. I mean, I think Matthew Golden is an amazing buy low candidate right now because this could be the type of thing where we see him flash, it happens, and he takes over and he becomes this is the perfect opportunity for him to become the receiver that everybody was talking about in camp. We saw him have a good game against the Browns when they went to him. And so I think that's the number one, maybe the only takeaway out of this game is just getting Matthew Golden more acclimated, more involved in the offense. Because if I'm the Packers, first I'm going to chew everybody out on that plane ride home, and like this is going to be no fun at all. But we're going to refocus. We're going to go in. We're going to blow the doors off Dallas. We're going to do what we know we can do here with Dallas, and let's get this rookie involved, who Texas guy going playing against the Cowboys. I bet there'll be might be some levels of emotion involved in that game for Matthew Golden too.
Let's talk about the Los Angeles Rams, another very interesting wide receiver room here. And this is just hilarious when you look at the season long target earners. You got Puka Nacua with a league high 35 targets, Devontae Adams with a whopping 28 targets through 3 games. And after that, Kyron Williams is next up with 6 targets. I mean, you want to talk about consolidated, clean offenses, Jeff. Puka Nacua and Devontae Adams are combining for a 69% target share right now through the first 3 weeks. I mean, they're not even looking at anybody else. We got 5 targets going to Tyler Higbee. We've got 3 targets going to Tutu Atwell, the wide receiver 3 out here. I don't really know how much there is to discuss about this, other than like you can really buy into both these guys. I do my rest of season rankings. We're going to talk about it a little bit on tomorrow's show, but I moved Puka all the way up to wide receiver 1, and I also moved Devontae Adams up to wide receiver 9. I've got both of these guys right now inside my top 10. It's just like this is a good offense that moves down the field, and you see it. Matthew Stafford is either looking to Puka, looking to Devontae Adams, or checking down to Kyron, and it doesn't seem like anybody else is even a part of the game plan.
Yeah, Puka's on my list of guys that I was just smashing early in drafts and then like just kind of cooled off of for a little bit of window in August. I need to just delete social media next August, but that's neither here nor there. No, it's I think it's yeah, exactly what you're seeing. My fun little victory lap of Devontae Adams leading in targets lasted 1 week before Puka blew him out of the water in targets, but that was a little nugget that I picked up from the Rams beat during doing their training camp reports, which we've talked about previously. But I think that you're exactly right. The ADP for Adams never made any sense when you looked at the ADP last year for Cooper Kupp in like the middle of the second round, while Puka Nacua was a first round pick. Adams dropping into late round 4, round 5, that didn't make any logical sense, and it was
He's
something that
old,
I drafted a
Jeff.
lot of.
Old receivers aren't good. That's why Keenan Allen fell into round 10. These old receivers, man, they just can't play. I don't know if you know.
Well, Keenan Allen
But yeah,
started
you
in
can
round
yeah.
17. He worked his way up to round 10. So
But you talk about it like the early season convictions. I came out with my first set of rankings the day after the Super Bowl, Monday morning. I said, "These are my 2025 draft rankings." You know who my 101 was? Puka Nacua.
yeah,
And then they signed Devontae Adams, and then we started getting these reports that Adams was involved, and I slowly just kept moving him down and moving him down and moving him down. And before I know it, I'm saying I'm not taking Puka unless he's there early in round 2. And boy, do I feel silly about making that change. All right, Jeff, we got a few more that we want to talk about here, and Chicago Bears, I think, are definitely worth talking about. Caleb Williams has been red hot. We're going to talk about him a little bit on the Risers and Fallers show tomorrow. But looking at the week 3 utilization, there's a lot of excitement building for Luther Burden. And as I so often do, I'm going to be that annoying wet blanket here and point out that Luther Burden wasn't really all that involved. He ran 9 routes, and I've kind of chalked up the big touchdown he had. A 65-yard touchdown is awesome, but that was a film room touchdown, is what I see there. They knew that they found a weakness and they wanted to exploit it, and that's what that was. That wasn't Luther Burden beating a guy, making a play after the catch, doing any of those things. It was a beautifully designed play made to attack a weakness on the Cowboys, and they wanted to get that ball to their fastest guy, who just so happens to be Luther Burden. I don't know. Am I being too much of a wet blanket here, or are you starting to buy into what we saw from Burden last week?
um, I think the lack of DJ Moore involvement opens the door greatly for me to buy into Luther Burden. Is
Mm-hmm.
We talked about it on the Thursday night live show with Josh Falsing came on to talk with me and Matt Waldman, and we had discussed that everybody's waiting for Burden to replace Olamide Zaccheaus, but maybe it's Burden replacing DJ Moore is more where the eye line should potentially be, and
Yeah.
and we had talked too on that about the frustration with more kind of with the effort that was put out last year, and then kind of throughout the off season, some of the storylines that were happening there and the way they got blown out in week 2, that sometimes for a brand new coach, that tends to be the moment where they say, we were playing the vets early. The vets aren't buying in. You guys are just sitting, and I'm going to play my guys now. I'm going to play the guys I brought in now. And they didn't get there in week 3, but they definitely had a refocus in week 3 and came in with a lot better attitude than I think that they opened, especially that week 2 performance against the Lions. So I'm buying Burden in terms of if he's available, I'm going to add him probably in most any leagues if he's free, basically at this point. But you're the Bears fan, you're plugged in. What odds do you think there are that DJ Moore ends up getting traded here in the next couple of weeks?
I'd say he's probably one of the most likely wide receivers to be traded in the NFL, but probably like 20 to 30% is about realistic. I mean, like we always talk about these players that seem so obvious to be traded, and a lot of them don't. And I think that DJ Moore is there. but just the reality of having been a fan long enough. I will say we have seen the NFL kind of change over the last few years, where like it used to be the NFL trade deadline, we'd be sitting there like patiently waiting the deadline, and then it would just come and go, and we're like, oh well, nothing happened. And now we'll see teams 2 weeks before the trade deadline start wheeling and dealing all the way up to it. So I think maybe more likely than he would have been in years past. But yeah, the vibes with DJ Moore are just weird. I could see the Bears wanting to trade him, but I also don't know what team out there wants to trade for DJ Moore, where they're going to have to give up likely draft capital and take on his $100 million contract. And I don't know if there's any teams out there right now that are saying like we're a wide receiver one away from contending. And it seems like those are usually the teams that make the pushes for these guys.
If he's coming in with the right attitude, and there's some history with Joe Brady and DJ Moore, and
Oh yeah, yeah.
you know,
That's one I
they were
could see.
together in Carolina, and if you look
Mhm.
at what the Bills' receiving
And
room
he'd be a
potentially needs
perfect, perfect fit with Josh Allen.
with Josh Allen, with the things that Khalil Shakir can do, with Keon Coleman, with having Palmer there and those tight ends, like kind of
And
basically
they showed
what
last
Elijah
year like
Moore's
they did it
doing
with
on steroids.
Amari Cooper.
Yeah. Well, and we see wide receivers traded now. That seems to be the position that gets traded because they just don't hit the market. Wide receivers don't
Mhm.
rarely hit the free agency market, and I think that we used to not see trades because teams would all just play the comp pick game, and they would say, "Well, you have to give me a third round pick to trade this guy because I know if he goes into free agency, I'm going to get a third round pick for what he signed." But I think that teams have they I think some teams don't necessarily want to be limited by the comp pick, like because you can't sign talent if you want to get comp picks. You have to be very maneuvering around what you can add in the offseason if you do want to get those comp picks. But I think that wide receivers in particular, it's just they don't hit the market, and teams are playing three of them every single snap, and they recognize that what they can do to bring the offense up a level.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Dallas Cowboys on the same field that we just saw the Bears playing on last weekend. This is one that I think needs discussion because CeeDee Lamb is going to miss some time. It sounds like it could be 3 to 4 weeks, potential IR stint. We don't really know exactly what to happen here. A high ankle sprain is always a very scary thing to hear, but good thing we've got Adam Hutchison to help calm us a little bit and let us know that high ankle sprains don't impact wide receivers the way they impact running backs, and hopefully he can return to play when he is back. But what we saw in week 3 when he was out there, or I'm sorry, when he wasn't out there, CeeDee Lamb, was that Jalen Tolbert ran 46 routes, George Pickens ran 44 routes, and Cavante Turpin ran 33. Despite all of that, Jake Ferguson, who only ran 29 routes, led the team with a whopping 14 targets. So do you think this is just one of those like, hey, we're without CeeDee Lamb. Let's just hit the ball to a guy that we trust consistently. And then when they kind of regroup and game plan going into week 4, we'll see a little bit more George Pickens, Jalen Tolbert, Cavante Turpin? Or do you think that Jake Ferguson could just be the lead guy here while CeeDee Lamb is out?
I think Ferguson's going to lead the team in targets just because there's the
Same.
comfort level with Dak Prescott there, and then getting George Pickens acclimated. I mean, Jalen Tolbert and I mean Turpin is a little bit different because the speed is there that you kind of do have to scheme him into the game plan, but you're not scheming him into the game plan 15 times. Whereas Tolbert, I feel like, is a little bit more. He happened to be out on the field and caught a touchdown. Is basically the Jalen Tolbert, or he happened to be running every single route and caught 4 balls. And so that's kind of where Tolbert lands. But I think Ferguson, just the rapport is there naturally. We've seen Prescott go to tight ends in the past. I mean, famously, a long time ago now at this point, but Jason Witten, so established there with Dallas. I think Ferguson, they paid him in the offseason. They're comfortable utilizing him and then getting Pickens acclimated, figuring out they're still kind of in that feeling out process with Pickens to get him all the way up and running. So that's where I land on those two players. And then the other pieces, it's like Tolbert is like a break glass in case of emergency, like deep play probably at this point. But at the same time, we saw 7 touchdowns last year when he was serving as the wide receiver too.
Do you think it's crazy to have Cavante Turpin ahead of Jalen Tolbert in weekly rankings going into week 4?
I feel like I'm the wrong person to ask about weekly rankings right now because my performance in weekly rankings has been absolutely horrible. But I feel I
I
really
just checked and that consensus prefers Turpin. So I thought that was gonna be a hot take because that's how I had it ranked, but I just pulled up consensus rankings and even consensus has Turpin ahead because he did play a lot. 45 Dak Prescott dropbacks and Turpin was running routes on 33 of those. And I think that's been the main hindrance to the Cavante Turpin excitement so far is that he's not a full-time player, that he only plays about half the snaps. But with CeeDee Lamb out of the picture, he was darn near a full-time receiver. And we know this is a guy, he only needs one. Breaks one tackle, gets behind one defender, and he's making your week right there in fantasy. So this to me feels very similar to the Tyquan Thornton, Marquise Brown conversation that we had last week. Like I want to swing for upside when I'm looking at those flex players. And Jalen Tolbert, sure, he might get 6 targets, might find his way into the end zone, but Turpin is the guy who can go for 100 and a touchdown and really be that guy that wins you a week.
Well, and you talk about and said like Turpin's the type of player that you game plan for. That once you get out of, you remove yourself from the CeeDee Lamb injury or
Yep.
having to get out of that game, you have a week to game plan. You're going to game plan for ways of let's get Turpin the ball again, as
Like
opposed
the play
to
CeeDee Lamb got hurt on. That could be a
yeah.
Turpin play right there.
Well, it
Just
should have
a
been a
little
Turpin
jet
play
sweep.
so that CeeDee Lamb didn't get hurt on that play. But that's why you have Turpin for. But yes.
Last one we're going to talk about here, Jeff. The Philadelphia Eagles. Who knew Jalen Hurts can throw the ball? I mean, they looked good, and we saw like the first half. They kept trying to do what the Eagles have done all year, just run, run, run. And man, I don't want to like dig into this too much because I know you like betting against a player like Saquon Barkley. It can make me look really foolish, but like he just frankly has not been himself. Fewest yards per game since his rookie season, or I'm sorry, ever. Fewest yards per game ever. Lowest yards after contact per attempt since the year that he was coming back from the ACL tear. I mean, it's just been frankly bad. Like we heard the Madden curse and the Super Bowl hangover and 400 touches and 2,000 yards and 600 opportunities and all these sorts of things. And I was just kind of viewing Saquon Barkley through the same outlier lens that I would look at Derrick Henry. But now you got to wonder if that usage from last year did take its toll. And I think they realized they went into halftime and they said, this is not working for us. That's why they just had to come out throwing. And all of a sudden we see A.J. Brown do what A.J. Brown does, 100 plus yards and a touchdown. Devonta Smith is heavily involved. Do you think that what we saw in the second half of that week 3 game could be a sign of things to come where they just say, hey, let's lessen the load from Barkley a little bit?
Right place, wrong reason, I think, is when I look at that. I don't think it's the I think what more has happened is the Eagles won the Super Bowl last year, and the entire league had an offseason of watching how did the Eagles win the Super Bowl? How do we stop the Eagles from winning the Super Bowl again? And they really got to a place last year where early in the year they were throwing the ball a lot, and then they just peeled off of that. But what you had was you had all that tape from early in the year of throwing the ball a lot and utilizing AJ Brown and utilizing Devonta Smith, that like kind of swimming into the stream of when you're preparing week to week for opponents, you're not like getting ahead of what the Eagles are doing. You're worrying about the Eagles when they come up on your schedule. So they kind of caught teams in like being prepared for the verticality that they can offer. And then I think that opened up the lanes for Saquon Barkley. Whereas now, because they had shifted so far in one direction last year through that playoff run, teams in the offseason were basically, let's plug it up for Barkley and let's dare him again to throw the ball, because are they comfortable doing that? But
Turns
we
out they
saw
are.
yeah, we saw this performance and we saw the Super Bowl performance. And so I think it's ending up the right place, but for the wrong reason, because at some point they need to say, in order to allow Saquon Barkley to be Saquon Barkley, we need to get back to this. We need to get back to scaring that team
Balance.
downfield and bombing the ball to AJ Brown and to Devonta Smith and Jalen Hurts. I think Jalen Hurts' confidence is probably at an all-time high right now. Whereas I think that there were probably some moments over the last, because you remember that year that he was injured, and then they had that really brutal playoff performance against the Buccaneers, and kind of coming in to early last year when they started 2-2. I think that there were some confidence things going on with Jalen
Yeah.
Hurts, whereas now he's a 15 out of 10 in the confidence scale. And so I think they come into the game in Tampa, the way that you're going to want to attack Tampa anyways is to be able to throw the ball down the field, because they've always been this strong run defense with Vita Vita Vea in the middle of that defense. They've always been good against the run. So I think the game plan in general going into Tampa, and then you've got Denver the next weekend as well. So I think they will get back to throwing the ball and attacking downfield because they recognize that they can do that. They have the talent to do that. And as part of doing that, of once you scare defenses away from putting 15 guys in the box, then those lanes open wide up for Saquon Barkley. And all of a sudden, Saquon Barkley is Saquon Barkley again.
Yeah, I'm kind of upset actually, like in hindsight right now that they put Jalen Hurts out on the field at all in that the last well, I guess he left that game with an injury. Never mind. I was gonna make a point that I don't want to make anymore, but I mean he has just been winning nonstop. Like since week 5 of last week, they have just been on an absolute tear. Like you said, the confidence is there. I hope that this is what we can expect because you almost wonder how much was just like cockiness that they're like, we don't even need a balanced attack. We are
Yes.
just going to run it down your throat and we
Yep.
are just going to tush push our way down the
Yep.
field and we're going to eat up the clock. And then they finally met a formidable opponent last week and they had to change it up a little bit. So, yeah, I mean, personally, I think the Eagles, when they're playing on and like they're getting AJ Brown involved and they're getting Devonta Smith involved, they're a very fun offense. And at the end of the day, I watch football because I like football and I want to see fun offenses out there. So hopefully we can see this going forward. I will say that there's still probably are going to be those dud games from AJ Brown. Like they're going to have some game plans where they come out running and they're not going to have to do anything else. And that does push him down into that, boomer bust low end wide receiver 2 territory. But the upside was on display last week. We know it's there and it's worth talking about. Jeff, any final thoughts before we sign this one off?
No, this is just fun to break down, and I do think that we're starting to get a clearer picture. And I'm,
Mhm.
I pushed back hard the first couple of weeks where I was kind of looking at performances from last year and where players stood through like 1 week through 2 weeks, and it's really random of like guys like Jamar Chase will be like wide receiver 45 in week 1 last year or something like that. And then once you start to get to week 3, week 4, week 5, for the most part, guys have started to move into the direction that they're going to end up. Where, like, if it's for the most part through, once you get through this next coming stretch, these next couple of weeks, you're going to have a pretty good idea of like, this is, like maybe like Terry McLaurin is like the dud this year of like, it's just not going to happen here this year.
And maybe
Or,
that helium isn't going to pop for Roma Dunze. Maybe he just keeps doing
yes,
what he does. Yeah,
exactly.
like a lot of these things we've seen enough now. It's not a 1 week blip. It's not. Oh gosh, I'm trying to think. I wish I had the name off the top of my head because there was a guy a few years ago that had like a huge week 1. It was the first year we did Fab in my home league, and a guy spent 100%. Travis Benjamin, that's who it
Yeah.
was. Travis Benjamin had a huge week 1, and it was the first year we did Fab. Somebody dropped 100%. Like I can't believe you guys let me get Travis Benjamin. He averaged like 20 yards per game for the rest of the season. But yeah, like you say, through week 3, then we get a clearer picture.
Isaiah Likely last year. I mean, Isaiah Likely,
Yes.
that Thursday night opener last year looks like, oh my God, like this is a new weapon for the Ravens. And then I thought the Ravens, sticking on the Ravens were fascinating against the Lions. I know they didn't win that game,
Mhm.
but through the first 2 weeks, it looked like it's the Derrick Henry, Zay Flowers, Lamar Jackson offense of like, we're just going to narrow it down here. And then what do we see week 3? They come out and it's Rashad Bateman and it's Mark Andrews. And they both
Hmm.
got touchdowns, but they were heavily involved. Whereas the first couple of weeks they were just complete zeros. It's teams. I think teams kind of they're trying to feel themselves out. They're recognizing, we do have to get Bateman involved. We do have to get Andrews involved. Like they're not going to naturally fall into being involved. We've got to. These are our guys. We have to get them up and running. So I think that that's what you start to see maybe coming off some of the first couple of weeks. And so that's where if you lean too hard into, maybe the Chargers receiver room, as much as we are on Quentin Johnston right now, the Lad McConkey erasure that is going on. Apparently that's the thing now. Lad McConkey forgot how to play football. And just telling you right now, Lad McConkey is a bad, bad dude. And you will see that sooner rather than later.
Well, let's save that for the Risers and Fallers episode, Jeff, because Lad McConkey is on that list. But I want to thank everybody for tuning in today. Be sure to tune in tomorrow, and Jeff Bell and I are back talking about some of the biggest risers and fallers coming out of week 3. As always, thank you so much for taking the time to listen today, and we will see you tomorrow.